Thanks for joining me. This is Danny, and welcome back to my Real Tech series. Today we are going to be taking a look at pollution. The pollution that we have in our sky. We've been dealing with pollution since the beginning of this series because we have a mod called Pollution of the Realms installed, and it is basically causing emissions to be emitted by things that burn fuels, more or less. So things like furnaces and our some of our immersive engineering machines like the coke oven and the blast furnace. These both produce emissions, and those emissions, and also torches and lighting, and those emissions will float up to the sky, or they will get stuck inside buildings, and they will cause us all kinds of problems if we don't have a way to manage them. And in some cases, the carbon emissions can actually be useful to you, such as with the greenhouse project that we'll be taking a look at later in this video. Now, there are three different types of emissions that are produced by this mod. There is carbon emissions, those are the dark colored ones. And then there are sulfur emissions, those are the yellowish ones. And then there is dust, or also known as volcanic ash. So in this cave, I have a big mess with pollution and such, because I have some torches in here, and they don't produce a whole lot of pollution, but over time the pollution does accumulate, and it does have a tendency to go up, because pollution does follow rules of gravity, and it is lighter than air, so it floats up whenever given the chance, and it moves around randomly. So for instance, if there were a pollution block under here, eventually, just over time, it would eventually end up going up to there, so it'll always end up finding the highest point eventually. So what I've done is I've kind of blocked off this area here so that the pollution doesn't sink out and end up going up into the sky, and I put a big hole here for the pollution to just kind of accumulate and kind of get out of our way, but it also gives us a chance to learn about it and play around with it and figure things out. So this single block here is a sulfur block, and if we turn on F3, we can see to the right where it gives us our block information that it says add pother : sulfur, which means pollution of the realms, sulfur block, and the density is light. Now, pollution blocks can collide with each other and combine together. So if two light density blocks combine together, then we get a medium density block, and if then a third one joins that, then we end up with a heavy density. So all these blocks up here are heavy density blocks. They've been accumulating for a long time. No more pollution can go up into that area because they are already heavy density. If we stick our heads in the pollution, some interesting things will happen. So first of all, because these are heavy pollution, they're going to give us some bad effects. So this is carbon right here. This is heavy carbon, and if I jump up in there, you can see that I get some bubbles, and sometimes I end up with blindness. So right now I have blindness 3 for a few seconds, just from sticking my head in some pollution. And of course, because there's bubbles there, you know that if we stay in that pollution, I actually can't seem to place a block there, but if we stay in that pollution, we can drown here, just like we're in water. So we're basically suffocating right now in the pollution, in the smoke. And now the sulfur is actually a little bit worse. It's a little bit more noxious. If I stick my head in there, I have a chance of getting poisoned as well. Of course, now it's not happening. There we go. So I got poison 3, and then I got the blindness as well. And of course, it's less likely to happen with light density. These are heavy density, so more stuff is, so it's going to be worse. Another thing to keep in mind is that if an emitting block like a furnace runs out of room, so if we end up with a situation like this in a place where we have a furnace where we're packed with pollution, so let's say there's a furnace in this corner and this whole area is packed with pollution. If that furnace tries to emit another block of pollution and it has nowhere to put it, then things will blow up. So do beware. We can see that this sulfur block moved to a different location, just randomly. It moved over there. We can also push it. Now, if we use an empty hand, we have to hit it quite a few times. If we have something in our hand, we can use it to push it, and it'll actually push it faster. Torches will create pollution. They create quite a bit of pollution. Actually, the candles from Pam's Harvest Craft also create pollution, but not quite as much. But you can see over time, even though these are doing a very, very small amount of pollution, over time it does accumulate, and we end up with quite a bit of pollution in here. So we have this little thing called a vacuum. that we can use to vacuum up pollution. Now, if I vacuum these up, we'll look in our inventory and we'll see, hey, we've got pollution blocks. Oh, where did they go? They disappeared. Oh, and they're floating back up. See? Because we can't hold pollution blocks in our pockets because they will just, they're like smoke. So how can you hold smoke in your pocket? It's just going to drift out, right? So we pick it up, it drifts away again. So we need this little backpack. It is called a golden vacuum bag. Actually, there are 3 different tiers. The golden is the second tier, and the tier determines how much they hold. This one can hold 256. Currently, it has 99, so 8 sulfur and 91 carbon. Diamond one, obviously, is the top tier. That one holds 512. We have to put this vacuum bag in our backpack slot. In our armor chest plate slot. And then we can pick these up. Now you can see that particular block was a denser block. So when you pull a medium density block, it's actually counting as 2 emissions, and a heavy density will count as 3 emissions. That's how we can clean up pollution from indoor spaces such as this. Obviously, it's not going to be practical for us unless we have some way of flight to be able to go up into the sky. We'd have to tunnel or tower our way up there and then go around and try to clean up all those pollution blocks. So we're not going to be able to do that. But you may notice that 2 things, I guess. One is the pollution is scattered all over the place. And 2, it's mostly sulfur blocks. And I mentioned earlier that that the carbon pollution is a lot more common than the sulfur. And the reason that this is the case is because the carbon pollution will dissipate by doing one of 2 things. Either causing this to happen, it essentially bone meals the ground. And because it's carbon, it feeds the plants and it causes them to grow more quickly. And then the plants can then absorb the carbon, so then the carbon disappears. It can also destroy leaves, so that is why we have all of this leaf destruction over here. Now this area has a lot of trees in it, so that's why it was able to absorb so much of the carbon. And then also we had a lot of grassy areas where it could do things like this. This whole area was like this, and I've been cleaning it up. So to get rid of the carbon pollution, really what you want to do is you want to keep this stuff cleaned up so that it can whoops, except probably don't do it with a with a really, really fast Maddock. But you want to keep the stuff cleaned up so that it can continue to absorb more carbon pollution. And then obviously with the trees, we want to replant them. So I'm going to go through and I'm going to replant all these trees, and then they'll be able to absorb some more carbon pollution. Now, of course, we want to avoid getting that stuff up in the sky in the first place, and we'll talk about how to do that also in a bit. Now, the sulfur pollution is a little bit more difficult to get rid of, and that causes podzol on the ground. So it'll basically kill whatever's there, and it'll convert the grass to podzol. I think there were a few spaces around here where we had some podzol just kind of randomly hanging out where we wouldn't necessarily expect it. So here, it had access to the ground. It probably wouldn't have been able to do this if those trees were there. So the carbon cleared away the leaves, and then it was able to turn this ground into podzol. So here again, we can pick up the podzol and put dirt there, and then it'll be able to absorb more carbon pollution. More sulfur pollution. Now this doesn't happen every time. Like, it will randomly produce podzol, and there's about a 50% chance that when it produces the podzol, it will dissipate. It'll basically dissipate. I'm pretty sure that they can also kill crops as well, because I've noticed that I've had some random crop killings where the carbon will actually cause your crops to grow faster at times. So you can see, if you have a ton of pollution, you're going to have a big mess down here. So, of course, we're going to want to take a look at how to clear that up. But before we do that, let's take a look at a place where we have a little bit more serious runaway pollution. Here it is. There's the massive pollution. Now, this pollution was produced, not entirely my fault. There was actually a bug in the mod at the time. There was one version of the mod that had a bug that was causing pollution to be produced very, very, by itself exponentially. So there are multiple things that can produce pollution besides what we had already talked about, of course, like the furnaces and machines and things like that that burn fuels. But also animals, when they die, can cause pollution. When they eat, they can cause pollution. When we eat, we can cause a little bit of pollution. So I have an aerometer, which shows us the pollution in the area, or in the current chunk that we're in. So in this chunk, there's only a little bit of sulfur, or a little bit of carbon. But if we go into the next chunk, we will see that our meter should go up. So here we've got 14% sulfur and 13% carbon. This was had all come from the smeltery, which used to be here. I've taken it to my new location. And the last time I was here, and you can see there's a lot of podzol on the ground. This is from the sulfur, of course. And there's a lot of bone mealed ground here. That was weird. Oh, I broke my aerometer. What? Oh, well, that's weird. Okay. I guess it takes damage when you hit things with it. So, but it can be repaired with glass. So this area we saw was about 13%. 20%, we're going to start to get some bad effects. First, we get mining fatigue. Later on, we get hunger at about 40%. This is from carbon. We get weakness at 50%, slowness at 60%, poison at 70%. Now, it would be, we're talking about a ton of pollution here. Nausea at 80% and wither at 90%. And then sulfur has some similar things. You get poison at 30%, blindness at 50%, and wither at 90%. Now, you'd really have to be pretty careless to get to the point of wither. But it's certainly possible if you've got a lot of stuff going on and you're not doing anything to manage your pollution. Also, it does block light. So the light level at the ground will get lower if the pollution is really, really, really high. You can see that some of the stuff has already dissipated since we've gotten here. In fact, we have more the grass that I broke over here. Some of it has come back. So we can get rid of that, and we'll get rid of... And of course, the carbon is going away faster. The sulfur is going to take longer. So, we can break this podzol to help it along a little bit. Lava pools can also emit a small amount of pollution. That's what that is over there, what we're seeing in the sky. Fire also causes pollution. We did have a massive forest fire here in this redwood forest some time ago. And you can see there's some pollution in the sky. Most of it has kind of dispersed. It's mostly sulfur left. We just saw a carbon one disappear, probably because it bone mealed a fern and made it into a large fern. Obviously, the ground here is already podzol, so there's nothing here that would get rid of the sulfur. So the sulfur is kind of stuck there until it drifts off. It does drift. It moves around randomly. It kind of drifts with the wind, so it's like a cloud of smoke in the sky. This is how we repair our aerometer. Glass pane in an anvil. I guess we would need 3 or 4 of them. A little bit of XP. So note to self: don't hit things with the aerometer. As you can see, we have no pollution here, so no problem. So if our pollution is really high and it's causing bad effects, we do have these respirators. And there's iron level, gold, and diamond, and the difference between them is just their durability, so the diamond will last the longest. So one way for us to manage pollution and kind of direct where it goes in order to keep it out of our house and that sort of thing is to use chimneys. So there's a companion mod to Pollution in the Realms called Advanced Chimneys that allows us to make these different types of chimneys of all different types of materials. We can make chimneys, we can make vents, and we can make pumps. And the idea is that a chimney will direct things going upward. So I have a couple chimneys behind these furnaces. So whenever there's pollution, it'll always go in those chimneys and then float upward, because as we already saw, the emissions tend to float upward. So just placing a chimney adjacent to any emitting block will basically cause all of its emissions to go up into the chimney, unless it tries to do two emissions at once. So remember, we have two different types of emissions. We have the carbon and then we have the sulfur. Now, something like the smeltery from Tinkers actually produces quite a bit of pollution, and it will periodically try to emit both a carbon and a sulfur at the same time, in which case you need two chimneys in order to handle that. So I have two chimneys hooked up to this smeltery. However, there's a tricky part to this, and that is that the smeltery emits from the controller. So, and you can see there are no chimneys touching the controller. So what I've done, and I've showed you this in a previous episode, but I'm just going to show you again now, just to put things into context. I have a pump here, which allows us to pull emissions downward. And it also allows us to push them to the side up to 16 blocks through these through the vents. So I have one brick pump, and then I have a couple of vents. I have one here, and then they're going off into the backyard. So if we look back here, we will see that a string of vents continues, and then it hits both of these chimneys. So there are basically two chimneys hooked up to the smeltery, and then on the top of those chimneys, I have filters. So this is from Pollution of the Realms. We have three different tiers of filters. We have iron, golden, and diamond, and the difference between them is the capacity, how much can they hold. What these will do is they will prevent any sulfur emissions from passing. So they will catch all of the sulfur emissions. They will still allow the carbon emissions to pass. So it's a good idea to have these on all your chimneys as long as you can afford them, because as we've seen, the sulfur emissions are harder to get rid of. They can cause more problems, whereas the carbon can be kind of a nuisance when they're causing all this kind of stuff to happen. But they're not going to, unless you have so many that it's going to give you bad effects, they're not going to be as big of a problem. And then this is also what you would want to do if you wanted to do like a greenhouse. The filters don't have to be on the top, by the way. They could be in the middle of the chimney, so they could be at any point within the chimney. Another thing that you could do, if you really wanted to, is you could put a cover over the chimney. So if we go up to the top of this roof, we'll see that we have our chimney sticking out here. We could put like some kind of a ceiling over this area so that all the emissions would get caught and they wouldn't end up in the sky, and then we could just take our vacuum and suck them all up. You'd have to stay on top of that though, because if your thing overflows, one of two things is going to happen. If there's room for it to float up into the sky, it'll just float up into the sky. If it can't, eventually it'll back up and it could potentially cause explosions. Eventually those filters will fill up and they'll turn like kind of a yellowish orange color. And then at that point, we can take them down and put them in an anvil with some wool. Now, if we had our lumberjack working in this area with mine colonies, she would replace these trees for us over time, and that would help keep our pollution under control. That might not be a bad idea for me to have her come over here and do this. Of course, having a tree farm set up is helpful. Having any kind of farm, really, crop farm. Let's work on a little greenhouse project before we finish today. So I have a little garden out here. It actually has greenhouse glass from Serene Seasons, and all that really does is it allows crops underneath it to grow no matter what the season. So we may have crops that are restricted by season, like for instance right now carrots cannot grow because it's summer. They only grow in the spring and fall, but if we put one over here, we'll see that it grows. So what we're going to do is I have this greenhouse set up so that the center part of it is slightly higher than the rest of it. And that is so that we can pipe some carbon emissions into this area, or into this thing, and we'll get stuck in here. So it won't float away up into the sky. It'll stay inside here, thus allowing our plants to take advantage of the carbon and grow faster. So what we're going to do is we're going to be using some chimney vents, some pumps, and some chimneys, of course. And those are from the Advanced Chimneys mod, of course. So I've got a little hole going into our house here. So previously we had the smeltery set up with a pump and then some vents going into a couple of chimneys out in the back. So I removed all that stuff. So we are now going to be pumping all of the pollution from the smeltery into our greenhouse. And by the way, we can repair these. So this is 70% full right now. If we throw some wool in it in a anvil with it, then we get a completely empty golden filter. So we don't have to recraft the filter every time, but it did take 1 XP point, so you know, no big deal. I ended up moving my greenhouse. The vents don't go as far as I thought they did. They only go up to 16 blocks, and you can't use pumps to extend that. I thought you could. So the smeltery is down here, and that is the controller. So we've got this pump underneath the smeltery. It has a redstone signal. It needs a redstone signal. So the pump brings the emissions downward. The vents can bring them horizontally. And with a pump hooked up to them, you can go up to 16 blocks. So that includes the chimney. So you can actually have 16, well, or it includes the pump, I guess. We can have 15 vents. That's the hole that was going out to where I had the greenhouse before. So I moved the greenhouse. I moved the greenhouse into the backyard so that I could go on a straight line to get as far away, or to get a little further away from the house. And it's back here. So these are all vents. They're cobblestone vents. And then here's the garden with our greenhouse glass. So now I'm going to run the smeltery and we'll see what happens in there. I'm going to make some manulin, some more manulin in the smeltery. Since it takes a long time for this stuff to burn, that'll give us lots of opportunities to see what happens out there. Actually, let me sleep. So every once in a while we should see some emissions blocks coming out of here. And we should never see sulfur because our filters will catch the sulfur. Okay, so we have a pollution block in here. It's off to the side. These do move around randomly, so eventually it's going to move out over the crops, especially as we get more of them. Now I did keep this open. Like, we can completely enclose this in order to trap the pollution in there and it'll never come out. I did leave it open, and that is so that it won't get backed up. So if this area ever gets completely full of pollution, eventually when the chimney brings it up, it won't be able to go up anymore. It'll bump up against the other pollution, and then it'll eventually just drift off up into the sky. That's just kind of a fail-safe, just to prevent things from blowing up, because if it ends up not having anywhere to put pollution, it could end up causing things to blow up. Okay, so we've definitely got some good growth going on in here, and there was a lot more pollution before in here, and now it's gone. So we know that there's some interaction going on there. As you can see, I've already harvested 5 carrots. I raised the greenhouse part of the roof a little bit because I want it so that as soon as the emissions come out of here, they end up syncing up. Otherwise, what was happening is they were kind of, because it was at the same level as this, is the emissions would kind of accumulate over here, and then every once in a while they would come out over the plants. So this way, because the emissions always try to go to the highest place, kind of like water, except in reverse, this makes sure that they're always over the plants. I did, while I was raising the greenhouse, I did actually let some emissions go. Most of them are gone already, so they've probably been causing all this kind of stuff to happen around here. Or possibly eating leaves away on me, I don't know. But I'd kind of like to catch it on camera where we actually see some growth and see a carbon disappear. But because we don't have a whole lot of pollution and this is such a small greenhouse, it doesn't happen very often. Just to get us a little more pollution, I did put a furnace next to this vent. And I'm just making a bunch of charcoal just to produce some pollution for demonstration purposes. Because I'm done with the smeltery, I don't have anything else to do in there. But we want the furnace next to the vent. We could have it above a pump, but if you put it next to the pump, it doesn't work. So if we put it next to the vent, then it works. And then it ends up emitting out into the greenhouse. So let's see what we get. So if we see a pollution block come out here, we'll see it. Oh, yeah, I've already got a couple of them up there. They do move around randomly, so that one that was over here is now not there anymore. It probably moved because this hasn't grown at all. So I walked away for a little bit and I came back. There's actually less pollution, even though we're still producing it. And I've got a couple more carrots out here. Nice. Oh, and there's some more growing, and that took that last pollution block. So now it's completely clear up there. So it's actually absorbing the pollution faster than it's being produced by the furnace right now. So you can see this is beneficial in a lot of ways. It keeps the pollution out of the sky, and it gives us growth acceleration on our plants. Win-win. These are some of my future plans. I haven't decided what I'm going to do next, but I do want to get into some cars with the Ultimate Cars mod and making some roads and some ways to get around places a little bit faster and more efficiently. I want to take a look at the automated redstone mod at some point, but I want to try to think of a project that we can do with that to make it interesting, to make it an interesting thing to do. The rustic mod. I really want to play with the rustic mod very soon and do some playing around with the different aspects of that mod. Airships, I want to get into airships as well. Another way of transportation, also a good way to get us up in the air, and maybe we can clean up some of this excess pollution with an airship. Oh, that actually, you know what? That's a really good idea. Because I know that this stuff is going to clear up eventually now that we have things in place to prevent as much pollution. But yeah, it would be nice to get rid of that stuff more quickly, and that would be a good way to do it. That would be a really good way to do it. Inventory management. Inventory is still kind of clunky, so I do want to look into doing that, possibly with Magneticraft, with the help of Magneticraft, and possibly some other mods as well. I want to do a Main Street build over there, where Main Street is, but has nothing on it so far. We want to build some shops and maybe some little restaurants and bars or whatever. Ironwood tree farm, that is rustic. Ironwood is a very nice looking wood that also can get us iron. So yeah, we'll take a look at that in the future. So I hope you join me for that. If you do have any questions or comments about pollution of the realms or whatever, feel free to leave them in the comment section below, or if you just want to say hi, you can do that too. And if you did enjoy this, if you learned something from it, do please click the like button, and if you're not subscribed already, you can go ahead and subscribe so that you get notified of future videos, and join me next time. Thanks for watching. Bye.